Everyone, thank you so much for coming. Before we get started, just a reminder, please, please, please silence your cell phones for us, or turn them off. And if you do have a phone call, if you could please take it outside. But anyways, thank you all for coming. I'm kind of starstruck because we had a senator last month, Senator Larson, if you guys were here. Now we have Mayor Barrett, former Mayor Barrett, but he was, that's right. But he was mayor while I was growing up, so he'll always be the mayor now. So for those of you who don't know, Tom Barrett's here. He was our mayor. God, I don't even know how long ago.
Almost 18 years to get her. So 2021.
There you go. But reason Mayor's here today is to talk to us about his time as the ambassador to Luxembourg, which I'm very jealous of that as well. So with that, I'll pass it over to Mayor Barrett.
Okay, thank you very much, Evan. Thank you. Well, thank you very, very much for allowing me to come and talk to you. I am no longer working full-time, and my wife gets tired of me giving her speeches. So this is really a welcome. My wife thinks she'll allow it. And as I look at the crowd, my wife and I took a trip last fall. We took one of these Gate 1 tours to Vietnam. And there were, as we sat down for the initial meeting, I had this flashback just now because there were 4 men and 13 women. And I said, I think I now know what senior living is going to be like. With the ratio of women to men, that's what it was, but it was a wonderful trip. But that's not why I'm here today. I was asked to come and talk about my time as ambassador to Luxembourg. But I'm happy to talk about anything you want to talk about. I will try to be as diplomatic as I possibly can, which may or may not turn out to work. I've actually done this talk several times, and I have to admit, I try to be a Boy Scout or an altar boy or whatever you want to call it, and then I find out that the people in the audience want something a little more rabid. So I don't know what you're going to be like, so just so you know, again, I'm very, very comfortable being here. But I have to tell you, I am a blessed person. I have nobody to be mad at because I've enjoyed a career that has allowed me to really look at our society from the city, the state, the federal, the international level from many, many different perspectives. Or to put it another way, I've had a difficult time holding a job throughout my career as I've served in different branches of government and had the opportunity to see how government works and doesn't work. But the one that I'm here to talk about today is my most recent one, which was serving as the United States ambassador to the Great Duchy of Luxembourg. And I thought what I would do is just take a couple minutes to tell you how one becomes an ambassador, in case any of you are interested, and how this came about. So I had, as Emma said, I had the great fortune of serving as a mayor in Milwaukee for almost 18 years, a job I absolutely loved. But in 2016, I decided that it would be really, really cool if Milwaukee could host a national political convention. I had attended 5 or 6 Democratic conventions throughout my career in Chicago and Los Angeles and Philadelphia and Charlotte and Denver. And I always thought it would be fun to put Milwaukee on the map and get a convention. So right after the 2016 election, I brought a group together and we started working. And it was a 3-year process where we worked to get the convention. And I think we all know the punchline. We got the convention and I was beyond ecstatic. And then about 6 weeks before the convention started, I received what I call my Dear John Zoom call. And again, history, if you remember the history at the time, this was during COVID. So I knew what was coming. I knew that, okay, there's no way they're going to bring 50,000 people to Milwaukee in the middle of COVID. So we had the Zoom call, and the representative, President Biden, was on the phone, and others were on the phone, and they were very, very apologetic. And I was, quite honestly, polite, because I knew it was coming. What am I going to do? I can't fight reality. But after that phone call, the woman who was representing President Biden was a very good friend of a woman here in Wisconsin, in Madison, who's a good friend of mine. And they were exchanging text messages. And this woman representing President Biden, Anita Dunn was her name, she sent a text message to my friend Teresa saying how difficult it was to lower the boom on me. And she said, oh, we really owe that guy. And my friend Teresa told me that, and I thought, I don't know what you owe me, but I would like to collect. And so I thought, okay, what do I want to do? And I had the good fortune of working in Washington, D.C. for 10 years as a congressman. And I really wasn't that eager to go back at that time to Washington, D.C. But I had throughout the course of my career the opportunity to be a traveler to the U.S. ambassador's residence in Dublin, the U.S. ambassador in the Czech Republic, and the U.S. ambassador's residence in Israel. And every one of those places that I left, I thought, wow, that's quite a place. I don't know what the job's like, but this is really amazing living. And they all were. And so I thought, okay, I wonder how one becomes an ambassador. And I had no clue. And then I got my education in ambassadorial politics, which I'll share with you again. I'm not going to use the whole time to tell you this, but it's actually, I think, a little interesting. So I had no clue as to how one becomes an ambassador, but I knew enough people in the White House, and I had Senator Baldwin and Senator Sherrod Brown, a good friend of mine from Washington, were helping me pretty actively. And so I thought, okay, how do I do this? And I went to Tom Loftus. Some of you might remember the name Tom Loftus. He was the Speaker of the Assembly in the 1980s, and then he became the U.S. ambassador to Norway under President Clinton. And he was a friend of mine, and I called him. I said, Tom, how do you get one of these jobs? How do you get one of these jobs? And he said, well, you just ask President Biden. That's what I did with Bill Clinton. I just asked him. And I'm thinking, great. It's COVID. Nobody's traveling. Am I going to run into him in Walgreens? How do I just run into President Biden and ask him for this? And so I thought, okay, this isn't going to work. And then about maybe 2 weeks after he was sworn in, so this would have been the first week of February of 2021, I'm at work, and the announcement comes that President Biden is going to be making his first trip as president outside the Washington, D.C. area. He's going to hold a CNN town hall meeting in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Because one of the things you do as mayor or county executive or congressman, when the president, if they're of your own party, you go and meet them at the airport. And it was a cold, cold night the first week in February. And again, this is during COVID. And so I said to my wife, okay, we're going to go down there, and I'm going to ask him to make me an ambassador. I said, so this could be a little awkward. So you stand behind me, about a foot behind me, so it's not embarrassing. And I didn't want to I couldn't tell anybody that I was doing this, because I've been around politics long enough to know that once the word gets out that I'm looking for something else, well, then the vultures start circling immediately, and I'm dead man walking. So I couldn't tell Congresswoman Moore, I couldn't tell anybody from City Hall, because they would all only tell, 400 people would only tell one person each, and then I'd be a dead man. So I wasn't, I'm standing there, and there's a red carpet down at Signature Airport, the private part of the airport. And he gets off the plane, and he's coming toward me. And I've met him a dozen times in my career. And I'm also, with all due modesty, very confident that he was on the plane, and someone handed him a 3x5 card and said, okay, you're going to meet Tom Barrett, this is that and the other thing. I know the drill. I know that myself. And so he's walking towards me, and he goes, Tom, it's great to see you. I really want to help you. What can I do for you? That's a quote. And I had practiced this like 10 times so I could be really cool and not embarrass myself. And I said, well, Mr. President, I know that you are going to appoint a lot more career ambassadors than President Trump, but I would be honored to serve you as an ambassador. And he throws up his arm. He goes, I've still got a lot to give out. Where do you want to go? And again, I had practiced this because I'd been told, if you pick one specific country and his former 4th grade teacher once said, "Country, you're dead." So I said, well, I'd be interested in Canada or in Europe. Nice wide swath there, nice wide swath. And that was intentional on my part, because I had to deal with, of course, presidential politics, but I also had very, very, very important politics to deal with, and that was home front politics. And then my wife, who was a teacher at that time and was getting ready, or had actually just was about to retire, I had to convince her, as I've had to do many times in our career, that this crazy idea would be a great idea. And quite honestly, she would not have wanted to go to the Congo, or she would not have wanted to go to Somalia. And so I said, well, what about Canada or Europe? We can do that. So that was sort of the genesis of saying Canada or Europe. So he's nods his head, and then the $1 million moment. Again, my wife is standing back here. He turns to her and he says, "You know, this is a 2-person job. Are you up for it?" And so my wife takes a giant step forward and says, "Well, we've been married for 31 years. We've been a team. I'm up for it." And that's the end of the conversation. Right there, a 30-second conversation. And then you just wait. And then they call you and they ask you all these questions. And the questions were, okay, well, he was in Congress for 10 years. Was he on the Foreign Relations Committee? No. Did he take a lot of trips as a member of Congress? And actually, I took 0 international trips as a member of Congress that are paid for by the government. In large part, again, going back to my home situation, during the 10 years I was in Congress, my wife gave birth to all 4 of our children. And so she was always back here, I was going back and forth. And it was one thing for me to go to Washington, but if there had ever been a weekend when I called her and said, "Well, Chris, I'm going to Paris this weekend," she would have said, "Well, don't bother coming home." So I knew that I could just never take one of these codels, as they're called. And that was the right decision, and I'm happy I made that decision. But in any event, so I'm trying to think, okay, I wasn't on any of the committees. I didn't do a lot of traveling. And so they're asking, they want to help me, they're asking me. And then I said, well, all 4 of my children attended the Milwaukee German Immersion School, which they did. And so they learned in German. I did not say, and I don't speak a word of German. I said all of my kids did that, and actually my wife worked there for a year as well. And so that was it. Well, then I'm thinking, and this is where the lesson in ambassadorial politics comes in. Now, again, it's obviously much different under President Trump than every other president ever, but it still is a big money game. And we're playing in the major leagues with all this stuff. And I'm thinking, well, my kids went to Germany, maybe I do Germany. Well, Germany went to the president of the University of Pennsylvania, which coincidentally is the home of the Joseph Biden School of Diplomacy. Austria, the 2nd largest German-speaking country, went to Teddy Kennedy's widow. And so it's like, okay, that's off the table, that's off the table. And so then they called one day and said, would you like to go to Luxembourg? And of course, it was during the lunch hour, and my wife was at her retirement luncheon, which was great. So I couldn't call her. But I got off the phone, and like any red-blooded American, I immediately went to Wikipedia to look up Luxembourg. And I thought, Luxembourg, population a little over 600,000. Milwaukee, population a little under 600,000. I can do this. And so that was the analysis right there. Thinking, okay, I can do this. So we called back, and that's how the ball got rolling. So then you go to ambassador school. Again, this is all part of the deal. And ambassador school is 3 weeks just outside of Washington, D.C. on the State Department campus. And again, everything has changed under President Trump. Under President Trump right now, I think of the 180-some ambassadorships, over 100 remain vacant. So there's a huge, huge vacuum right now because he does a lot of his diplomacy or foreign relations, whatever you want to call it, through his son-in-law and others. He doesn't use the State Department much at all. And again, that is different from both Republicans and Democrats in the past. And in the past, again, this is not because of history course, because it's all changed in the last year and a half. Roughly a third of ambassadors would be political ambassadors. They would be wealthy donors and bundlers, people who raise a lot of money, people who are politically tied to the president, things like that. The other 2/3 would be people who came through the ranks of the Foreign Service, which is a remarkable group of people. I learned serving with them for 3 years in a very, very unusual lifestyle, in that they literally move by policy of the department every 3 years. So every 3 years, the members of the Foreign Service go to another country. And as I said to my wife, which she told me not to say, but I said it anyway, you know, for people who don't have a family, it's one thing, but if you have a family and you're moving your kids every 3 years, the way I described it, you're either giving your kids the best gift you could ever give them, or it's child abuse. And it could depend on different kids in the same family. You know, there might be kids who are like, oh yeah, I'm game, let's go. And then others, you know, you get a 7th grade girl or boy for that matter, and you're saying, I'm gonna take you away from your friends for the next 3 years. I know stories where it's a revolution in the household. So it's a very, very I could never have done it with our kids. I just never could have done it. I admire them. And you meet these kids, and it's pretty amazing when, you know, you talk to a kid who's been in Venezuela and Ireland and Luxembourg as they're growing up. So in any event, the way I always describe it is, if it's a country that you want to go to, that you want to take a vacation on, that's going to have a political ambassador. If it's a country that has a lot of problems or crime or doesn't like the United States, that's going to have a professional ambassador. So almost all of the Western European countries in particular, had political ambassadors. And then you get to the heart of Africa, and they're almost all career people. So it's just a different, much different dynamic. Now again, Germany doesn't have an ambassador, Ukraine doesn't have an ambassador, Russia doesn't have an ambassador. Many of the African countries don't have ambassadors. And so there's, within the State Department right now, and the Foreign Service, I think that there's just a lot of concern, because this is what they've committed their lives to, and all of a sudden they feel totally unwanted, quite honestly. And so that's a topic for another day. So now let me get to Luxembourg, if I can, and tell you, Luxembourg, it was a fabulous experience. We had 47 relatives come to visit us. I had cousins that I didn't even think liked me. It's amazing when you have a place to live, a very nice place to live, they come and visit. And our residence was not over the top. It was not over the top. And I went out of my way, actually, not to want to go visit ambassadors' residence in, say, Paris or London or other places, because I knew I would get ambassador residence envy if I saw these places. And the place we had, it was a very, very nice, there's homes on Lake Drive that are much nicer than this home, but it was a nice home. And it had some historic significance. The historic significance was in World War II, in 1940, as the Nazis were on their way to Paris, Luxembourg was a speed bump. In Belgium, they took 3 days, they fought for 3 days. Luxembourg, at the border, the Luxembourg soldiers, informed the Germans that the country was neutral, and you're not neutral anymore, now you're part of Germany. And so Hitler immediately took over the country, and he installed his Gauleiter, is I think how you pronounce the word, his governor, for what became the state of Luxembourg within Germany. And that gentleman, his name was Gustav Simon, lived in the residence where we lived. So the historic significance was the Nazis ran the country from the home we lived in until September 1944. And all of this, it was the 3 years that we spent there, we spent 3 years overall, was like a 3-year history of the war in Europe. because frankly, a major part of our mission was to remind people of the role that the United States played in Luxembourg in World War II. And I will tell you this, one of the most amazing parts of the 3 years is I witnessed firsthand American exceptionalism at its peak. And what I mean by that is that the people in this country, to this day, feel totally indebted to the United States for what we did in 1944 in particular. Because it was not just once, it was twice that we saved the country. The first time was in September of 1944. And one of my flashbacks that I'll always have with me is my wife met a woman just walking in the neighborhood. They were both walking a dog, and she invited us over for a brunch. She had actually worked at the U.S. Embassy when she was a young woman coming right out of college during the time that John Kennedy was president, and she was working the day he was killed. And so she talked about that whole experience. But she had lived within 2 blocks of our residence her entire life. And she explained to us that she was about 85 when we were with her. And she said when she was a girl, she had a sister, and her parents instructed both of them to have a suitcase packed because it was not unheard of to have the Nazi soldiers come to the house and say, "We are taking over this house, you're leaving." She said it didn't happen, but they were ready for it. But then, in the first week, actually September 9th, September 10th of 1944, she said that there was a knock at the door and German soldiers there, and they were looking for bicycles because it was a 24-mile ride back to Germany as the crow flies, and they were getting ready to flee the country. And they were looking for bicycles. She told them we don't have any bicycles. They did have bicycles, but anyway, after she left, she said, and we're sitting at a brunch at her home. She said after they left, the city got eerily quiet, and the next sound you heard was the clang, clang, clang of American tanks coming up the hill into their house. And I'm sitting there and I'm getting goosebumps because it's such an amazing story. And 2 things are going through my mind. One is, this is one of the most amazing stories I've ever heard in my life. And then the other thing was, who's going to tell this story in 10 years? Which shows you as we all age, and as the people who were alive during World War II pass on, what comes of this? What comes of this? And it was interesting because shortly after that was Memorial Day, and I was at the U.S. Cemetery. I probably went to the U.S. Cemetery 30 times, at least, while I was there. That's where General Patton is buried, just 10 minutes from our home. And it was one of our go-to spots with visitors and dignitaries to go there. And I was there for the Memorial Day service, and as I was leaving, a reporter with a camera asked me why I did this, and I explained to him, well, I think it's important that we keep the memory of those individuals who gave up their lives to free Luxembourg. We have to remember that, both for the people in Luxembourg and the people in the United States. And he starts crying. This 45-year-old guy, he said, "Oh, we will always remember it. We will always remember it." And he was true, because the busiest week of the year for us was always the week of December 16th, the Battle of the Bulge, because little communes, that's what they call them, little villages throughout the northern part of the country. So think of up in Fond du Lac. When I say the northern part of the country, it's like from here to Fond du Lac. They would have services at 6 a.m., 8 a.m. in the evening, depending on when the U.S. troops got there. And they would talk about the U.S. soldiers by name and the roles they played to do this. And my wife and I remarked, and then you see American flags that are flying year-round in these communities, that it seems like these people like the United States more than the people in the United States like the United States. And I'm not kidding. That's what it seemed, that they were so appreciative of the role we played. And so as an American and representing President Biden and the State Department and the people of the United States, nothing could give you a better feeling that your country is really beloved for what it did. And ironically, when we got back, and then I mentioned briefly that we had taken a trip to Vietnam, we were going to go visit a friend of my wife's in Hong Kong, and I wanted to go to Vietnam because I wanted to see the other side of the coin. You know, a country where we came in and were not appreciated, and see how they felt toward us, which was an eye-opening experience in and of itself, because from their standpoint, now I'm getting off on a tangent in Vietnam, their view is they won that war, and they're more than happy to have us come and spend their dollars in it. You know, so it's just very interesting. It's very interesting. So back to Luxembourg. So my first big memory in this job was one of the things that you do when you're an ambassador is you literally get a letter from your president. They sent me a letter in a big, it's about the size of a record album cover. And you take it with you in your suitcase, and then you take it and you present it to the head of state. And they literally accept your credentials. Again, all during COVID, so I have to rent this $200 zoot suit for like morning tales and stuff like that to do it. They reimbursed me for it. So I go and present it to the Grand Duke of Luxembourg. And then they ask you ahead of time, would you like to have a conversation with him following the receiving of your credentials? And you want that conversation to be in French, German, Luxembourgish, or English? Which was by far the most humbling part of this experience. That people in Luxembourg, and I'm not in any way exaggerating, a majority of the people in Luxembourg speak 4 or more languages. And as an American, hello, you know, I just don't. So obviously I said, well, we'll do it in English. So we sit down, and it's a very relaxed conversation. And then after we left, I said to my wife, I said, you know, this now is all occurring on roughly, I'm going to say February 10th, 2022. Russia invaded Ukraine February 24th, 2022. So this is 2 weeks before Russia invades Ukraine. I'm receiving at my office all of these missives from the State Department that are explaining how Russia is amassing troops, and all of our intelligence is showing that they're about to invade Ukraine. Okay, and what you're told is they send a démarche. Here's a démarche. Deliver this information to the highest ranks of government. So sometimes you get these démarches and they don't have to go to the highest ranks. They can go to someone in what we would call the State Department. They call it the Foreign Ministry there. And sometimes the ambassador does it. Usually the ambassador himself or herself doesn't do it. Usually it's someone who works for the embassy. But in this case, they were instructing me to tell the head of state that Russia was about to invade Ukraine. And before I could even do that with the Grand Duke, again, so we have the little talk, I leave with my wife, and I said to her, I could have sworn he said that President Biden has been making some radical statements about Putin. And my wife said, that's exactly what he said. So I'm in this situation. I'm brand new in the State Department. I'm getting all this information from Washington telling me that Russia's about to invade Ukraine. I'm supposed to deliver it to my new customer, for lack of a better term, and my new customer doesn't believe me. So it was just a surreal moment as I'm trying to think, what do I do? What do I do? They don't believe me. And then I met with the Prime Minister for lunch and tried to talk about it. And he's a very flippant guy, very charming guy. And he just says, that's not going to happen. Then I meet with the Foreign Minister, and he said, look, we like Putin. Here's a picture of me with Putin. And so I'm running up against a brick wall trying to convince them that they're about to invade Ukraine. So the obvious question, and I had months and months and months to think about this, why didn't they believe us? And the answer is really threefold. First, we had, and I'm being diplomatic when I say this, over the 20 years prior to that, several highly publicized intelligence errors, mishap, misleading, whatever your politics are, you can decide how. In other words, they didn't believe us. They did not believe our intelligence. That was reason number one. Reason number two, as I quickly found out, we think of Russia here from the United States perspective. Well, geographically, they're much closer. Moscow's literally in Europe. A lot of Russia's in Asia, but Moscow's in far Eastern Europe. And there were historic ties. In fact, the prime minister's family had Russian ties. And so you didn't have this natural animosity as great as we have had historically in the United States. And then third, they just thought it was crazy. They said, they're not going to do that. That doesn't make any sense. So then February 24th rolls around. They invade the country. And all of a sudden, they realize every single thing that President Biden had been saying and we had been relaying to them was accurate. That we said, this is what's going to happen, boom, it happened. This is going to happen, boom, it happened. So now, I'm the intelligence genius. And now they and other ambassadors are coming to me like, what do you got? What do you got? What do you got? And so literally overnight, their attitude towards the State Department and the CIA and all the other intelligence gathering changed dramatically, and they were relying on us heavily to do what we could. So that was a real eye opener. But intertwined with all of this, and again, this has changed dramatically, with some justification and significant amount of justification. Without a doubt, that was the major issue that I walked into. But the other two, what I call major issues, one of them was the presence of China there. There are, I think, 8 banks there. And you have to understand, so Luxembourg itself, which I'm sure most of you have never thought about, I had never thought about, smaller in population than Milwaukee County. If you look at the countries in this world where the most American debt is held, when I say American debt, T-bills, T-bonds, things like that, they are China, Great Britain, Japan, Luxembourg. That was my reaction. Because it's this finance capital. You have all these banks and insurance companies and refinancing, and they hold our debt. And so it's remarkable. It's a remarkably wealthy country, and it's remarkable to see how intertwined our economies are, which is a little bit later in the story as to how important that is. So you've got the Chinese presence, and they're trying to make the inroads. And the Luxembourgs, I guess you don't get wealthy without being smart. They're frankly, in my estimation, trying to do what they can to be on the right side of China as well, because they don't know how things are going to play out in terms of the future. And so that was constantly one of the tension points that we had, or one of the concerns we had. So again, it was Russia, China, and then the third one, which has received a lot of news, and we have seen a significant change, is NATO spending, which was a real problem during the time I was there. But it was a real problem that far predated my presence or presence of President Biden. So you go all the way back to, I think it was 2013 or 14, when President Obama was in office. There was an agreement called the Wales Pledge, where all the NATO countries agreed that they would they would move to reach 2% of their gross domestic product on defense. To put this in perspective, in the United States, we're maybe at 4%, maybe 4.5%. Luxembourg was basically at the bottom of all the countries in NATO at 0.72. And so this was really a case of a free rider, for lack of a better term. And I think the reason that you can explain it, you can understand this. Luxembourg is a country that has been invaded. It's been overrun many, many times. But generally speaking, it was France versus Germany or Austria or sometimes Spain. When there's peace in Europe, everything's hunky-dory in Luxembourg. And so they don't feel the need to spend money on defense because all their neighbors are getting along. And so they didn't. Now they put the money in other places, into healthcare, they put it into transportation. Ironically, without a doubt, the most controversial thing that I worked on as mayor was the streetcar. They started a streetcar about the same time, they've now expanded it about 5 times. But in Luxembourg, the streetcar, they call it the tram, the streetcar, the buses, the intra-national train service, not the train service to Paris or Berlin, but internationally, all of that public transportation is free. So they're spending a lot of money on that, on preschool, on music lessons for kids. So they're not spending it on defense. They don't feel a need to. So when President Obama was in there, he got them to do the pledge to move to 2%. And it was a slow slog, went a little bit while President Obama was in there, a little bit more when President Trump came in the first time, more so when President Biden came in. But then when President Trump came in, he basically blew it up. I mean, he just said, we're walking if you don't do more. They're doing more now. All the European countries are doing more now. And so that has been a change that has occurred, without a doubt, under President Trump. So it's been interesting to see that metamorphosis. So those are the issues that we really dealt with in a major way. So now we get to my final year there. And basically this week, first week of June, is when they have the big Normandy ceremonies, not in Luxembourg, but in France, of course. And you've got dignitaries that come over. And in 2024, President Biden came over for that. And the woman who was the defense minister, who was a friend of mine, she came afterwards, and she was just sort of beside herself, saying, ooh, he is not in good shape. And this is right before the horrific debate that he had. And she said, he's not, and I had others say that to me. And so they had this dilemma where they liked President Biden, the fact that he wanted to have good relations with Europe, but didn't feel he was up for the job. They frankly didn't like President Trump. And to show you that they follow American politics, but not as closely as you'd think, there were a few people, I'm not going to say it was 100 people or even a dozen people, who said to me, well, you should run for president. And I thought, okay, the best way for me to respond to this is to simply say, oh, in America right now, I am way too young to run for president. That's for those really old guys. And then move on to the next topic altogether. But they just didn't understand. And so now we get to the end of my time there, if you will, or close to the end of my time there. And every U.S. embassy has a election night party. And just, you don't know who's going to win the election, and just it's a tradition around the world. And because of the time change, our election night party actually was a breakfast that started about 7 a.m. And we, rather than having this hoity-toity hotel room, which is what they usually did, we had it in a sports bar because there were about 10 TVs. And it worked out very, very well. So I get there at 7 a.m., 8 a.m., and before 9 o'clock, President Trump is coming out and declaring himself the victor. And so now it's my job to really test my diplomacy skills, because on a personal level, I am not happy, but the show must go on. And so I'm addressing the room probably 3 times the size that people filled. And most of the people who came did not want to see the outcome that occurred. And I gave a talk. and it was on TV and everything. And it was sort of a spontaneous talk, but it really captured how I felt. And I said, because the concern is what's going to happen between the relationship between this tiny country and the United States. And I have to put on a happy face, of course. And I said, I feel very confident that the relationship between Luxembourg and the United States is going to be as strong as ever. And I really did, and I really do. I said, I cannot speak to the relationship between the United States and NATO. I was really on point for that. I said, I cannot speak to the relationship of the United States with the European Union. And I was really on point there as well. But the relationship of Luxembourg, the country, and the United States, the country, will remain strong. And the reason it will remain strong is our relationship is built on three incredibly strong pillars. The first pillar is our historic tie. What happened here in 1944 in Luxembourg has tied us together for hundreds of years. That's an incredibly strong pillar. The second strong pillar are our financial ties. The debt that's held by them, all the American investment, American and Luxembourg investment in the United States. Our economies, as small as it is very, very tied to our economy. That's the second pillar that's amazingly strong. And the third pillar is our shared values. That we're a democracy, we believe in freedom of the press, the right to free speech. And I have to tell you, when I was saying that, I was thinking, or are they the same? I hate to say that, but that's what I was thinking. And are our values really the same as they, do we share the same values? And I can't even give you the answer to that right now, because I don't know. But I did feel that way, and there is actually a woman now who has my position, and she seems to be off to a great start, which I'm very, very happy about. But I do feel blessed, as I would say to the people in the embassy, look, you don't understand. I was the mayor of Milwaukee. I'm used to having people yell at me in bars. That's what the job of mayor's like. You know, why aren't the streets plowed? Why isn't my garbage picked up? You know, why am I? How come I'm not getting this grant or this or that or the other thing? Over there, I was treated like royalty by everybody except my wife. I could not convince her to call me Your Highness. I will say this, and then I'll close it and open it for questions. You do have these nice dinner parties and things like that, and inevitably there's a hostess gift, and great chocolate, great wine, and so it was always chocolate and or wine. And after one set of visitors, my wife said to me, "Why is it whenever we get chocolate as a hostess gift, it disappears?" And I said, "I don't know. Why is it whenever we get wine as a hostess gift, it disappears?" So you can see what each of our sins are. I'm the chocolate guy, she's the wine gal. But it gave us an opportunity to meet a lot of wonderful people. So I'll stop there. I can talk nonstop, but I want to see if there's any questions or things you're mad about. And I'm sorry if your garbage isn't picked up. Yeah.
One point he left out when he was mayor, there was a lot of riots going on in the city of Milwaukee. You'll find out who I am because I was on the committee replacing do the work. And he did an enormous amount of work on getting people to get along with each other during the riot session. And it's because of his way of talking to you. And what he did with us, he put 10 people together. I'm that done. He put 10 people together of executives that he felt would be able to perhaps change some of the attitudes that were going on in the city of Milwaukee. So what we had to do is we had to meet up with each executive and have food with them go someplace that you would normally go with them, and then vice versa. All 10 of us did that. And we had to continue the relationship.
That's great. I'm delighted to hear that. I love doing that. I love doing that.
And we cried when you left because who was going to help us? So how do you do that? Well, I think that's a part of your story that you don't always tell. And a lot of us still have those relationships today. That's how I became a member of the Women's Club, which was because of getting to know somebody else. And then learning about somebody else's background and people, within people. For me, I still have a great relationship with Ethiopian people. So you did something that's lasting. I want you to know that.
Well, thank you very much. You're very kind. And I do feel that way. I mean, people have to just realize we have much more in common than we. One of my favorite moments is I had security as mayor. And my son, who was then 2 or 3, maybe 3 years old, he was asking me about one of my security guards, and he described him, and he said, you know, the one who looks like you, except he's black. Because he was my size, and so my son just saw Dexter, my size, and me, and the only difference was our skin color, which is, you know, tells you how on the mouths of babies. So thank you.
But I will say this, why did I get to go to dinner party here and you got to go wait in that?
Well, I'm trying to give you a hint on how to get the job. Well, the other thing that you find interesting here too. So I had a woman come from the State Department for lunch, and you do have. We get there and there's a housekeeper, there's a chef, a French chef, and then there's a house manager. And my wife came and she's like, I'm not comfortable with, I don't want somebody making our bed and doing our laundry and all our meals. And after about a month or two, I complimented her on how well she made the adjustment. Yeah. You get used to it really fast. You know?
We understand that here.
Yeah, okay, I understand. Yeah.
How many other ambassadors were there from other countries?
Oh, so that's a really good question. So, Luxembourg is a small diplomatic setting. If you went to the big one close by, was actually Brussels, because NATO is located there, the EU is located, so there are probably hundreds. And in Luxembourg, there was our diplomatic corps, resident diplomatic corps was only about 22. And it was primarily other countries in Europe, and including Russia, Japan, China, no, Canada. Canada had, most of the countries had a dual appointment of Luxembourg in Belgium. So it was a pretty tight group. But one of the more interesting things, in my 3 years there, I got to know almost all of the ambassadors very, very well, except I never once in 3 years saw the Russian ambassador. I saw the Russian ambassador's car at an Armenian event where my staff said, oh, that's the car of the Russian ambassador. But never saw it. And
Well, maybe he wasn't there.
oh no, he was there. He was there because I had been there about a year, and one of the newspapers came and wanted to do an interview with me about what my first year was like. And I relayed to him exactly what I relayed to you. And so they contacted the Russian ambassador, and he said, he was very snarky, and he said, oh, that guy, he's an amateur. The protocol, which is absolutely true, is the new ambassadors are, by custom, to contact each of their senior ambassadors and make a courtesy call. And that's normally what happened. I didn't do that with Russia because I was instructed not to do it, and you can understand why. I get there 2 weeks later, they invade Ukraine. Our relations were very, very frayed at that point. And so I didn't do it. So he used that to say, oh, that guy doesn't know what he's doing. But the fact of the matter is, of course I didn't do that. But I actually got along well with the ambassador from China. So it was good. But I had good friends. In fact, interestingly, Spanish ambassador to Luxembourg. His significant other is a woman that he met in Cuba, and they're partners. She's a professor at Swarthmore in Philadelphia. And when he first came, I went to the reception welcoming him, and she's all over me. She couldn't be friendlier to me. And I realized the reason was that she is from Cuba, but she got her master's and her PhD in Spanish to become a professor at Swarthmore from UW-Madison. So we're old friends right from the beginning. And so, in fact, several months ago, she wanted to take him to visit Madison, and so they came and visited us in Milwaukee and Madison. So I've kept up the ties. Now he's the ambassador to Belgium. So that was a wonderful experience getting to know ambassadors from other countries. But again, underscored my, what I would say, ignorance, for lack of a better term. Almost all of them probably speak 3 or 4 languages. You know, French is the diplomatic language, and I'm still to this day doing my Duolingo to try to, see what I can learn at my advanced age.
You've had a phenomenal career. At what age did you decide to go into politics, and why?
So I feel very blessed. I feel very, very blessed. So I grew up on the west side, as you know, in Milwaukee, and nobody in my family was ever involved in politics. I didn't follow the news, but I grew up watching the civil rights and Medicare in Vietnam, and I was always intrigued by it and thought it would be interesting. And so when I got out of school, I had helped a couple of campaigns, and I got frustrated. I thought I'm just going to run. So first time I ran, I lost, and then I won again. I will say in the 1990s, I was in Congress, and this is when we were having our family. And we were over visiting my mother, who's now been dead for over 20 years, and I asked her what she wanted for Mother's Day. And she said, I want you to quit politics. I want you to come home, be a normal person, and raise your family. All those people in Washington, they're nothing but a bunch of backstabbers. And I said, oh, Mom, that's not true. In Washington, they'll stab you right in the chest. And that's how I felt. But then underlying that is one of the things I like about politics / public service is when you can have a disagreement. Like, okay, I don't agree with you. I think that makes the democracy stronger to do that. So I've always liked that. But I would say my mom, she just wanted nobody to pick on her little boy ever. Yeah.
As you, I'm sure know, the Luxembourg American Cultural Society is right north of Milwaukee in Belgium. And there are some of us who now have dual citizenship between Luxembourg and
A very popular program.
It's a very popular program. Luckily, I have relatives, my ancestors on both sides of the family who came from Luxembourg in the mid-1850s when the country was just emptying up. I'm wondering about what Luxembourgers think about the dual citizenship that we all cherish, those of us who have applied and received it, and what you think the hopes might be for continuing that program or applying.
So this program that she's referring to, the dual citizenship program, is an amazingly popular program. I'll share something with you in case you ever get on Jeopardy. The only country that takes advantage of that program more than the United States is Brazil. Because the ties between the steel industry in Brazil. It's very popular in Brazil. I think they view it as an amazing magnet, both an economic magnet and a cultural magnet between the United States and Luxembourg. I never heard a single person from the Luxembourg government complain about it. I have wondered about the extensions, and it really didn't come up as a matter while I was there, can it be extended? I certainly would be pushing it if I were anybody who's involved in it to say, keep this program alive. I think both sides benefit from it immensely. My biggest concern would be actually from our side now, because I have seen comments about President Trump about not allowing people to have dual citizenship. So I think probably the bigger concern is from this side of the ocean than that side of the ocean. But a great, great program. And so not only is it sort of fun to have it and keeps the ties with your native country alive, but it's also a wonderful tool if you have kids or grandkids who want to work in the European Union, they can get a worker's permit or get an education there. So it's a great, great program. Yeah.
I'm confused about if you knew there was gonna be trouble with Russia, why there wouldn't be more incentive to get to know the Russian ambassador?
He never went anywhere. I never saw him. And well, again, I was told not to reach out to him.
Why?
Because I think to the extent that there was going to be diplomatic relations, I think it was going to occur at a pay grade way above me. And seriously, that would be a Secretary of State thing as opposed to an ambassador of Luxembourg. And I didn't have any authority in that area whatsoever. So it wouldn't have made any sense for me to try to create the diplomatic bridge as much as I think I could do it. I mean, they just would not have done that. They would. In fact, when we went back each year in June, so it's right about now, there's a big conference in Washington where the U.S. ambassadors from all over the world come for a 3-day meeting in Washington, which is really exciting. And so you hear from, again, when I was there, now these positions are empty, you'd hear from the ambassador of Ukraine, from Russia, from Israel, from Sudan. You'd hear from ambassadors from countries that don't have good relationships with us, where they can't even get a meeting. You would hear from places where it's so dangerous they have to live on compound. Maybe I'll go to this one if I can. And so during that period, I was extremely, extremely quiet because there were no problems. But there was one day where, this is the wise guy in me, it wasn't the Secretary of State, but it was one of his principal deputies, and he was talking about the war. And he said, Putin, with his little group of septuagenarian advisors sitting around running this war. And so then, they have questions, just like we have questions, and I got up and I said, well, I appreciate everything you said, but I didn't appreciate that vicious attack against septuagenarians. Yeah.
Do we currently have an ambassador in Cuba?
No, we do not. No, we do not. No. And travel is very limited. I would love to see that. A good friend of mine here, Ricardo Diaz, has traveled there several times. He was born there and talks about that.
One other question. You mentioned Luxembourg being a wealthy country. Is that based on its financial institutions?
Yes, yeah. It's a lots and lots of investment. In fact, one of my first meetings there was with the mayor of Luxembourg City. Luxembourg City is about the size of Green Bay. And they had some flooding the summer before I was there, and so they were doing a lot of environmental remediation work. And so I went to make a courtesy call to her. And I'm still sort of wearing my mayor's hat. And I said to her, so are you going to have to incur a lot of debt to do this? And she said, oh, we don't have any debt. And my head started spinning. Because when I was mayor, I was always fighting with Madison to try to get more resources for the city. And then I went back to the embassy and my staff said, oh, Luxembourg City, again, size of Green Bay, had a surplus of over €1 billion. Because you have all these financial institutions that are coming in, and they had a very, very tiny, what I would call transaction tax, that the city levied on a huge number. And so that's why they have all this free transportation and things like that. The other part that did break my heart was, I think it was a Good Friday, again, the first year I was there was a robbery at a restaurant, and an off-hours robbery, an employee was killed. And I'm still thinking like a mayor, and so I'm really nosy about this, and I asked about it. So this would have been in April of 2022. And so I'm asking about it, and they said, yeah, we're really, this is big news. This is the first one we've had since 2020. And I thought, oh my God, because when I was mayor of Milwaukee, I hate to say it, but in the summertime in particular, if I went a weekend without a homicide, I'd be happy. And they went 2 years without a homicide. So they didn't understand the guns at all. Yeah.
During your 3 years, how often did you get back to Milwaukee?
Not that often. So we came, the first year our son got married. The second year, a woman who stood up in our wedding got married. And then my sister-in-law died. So three times in 3 years. Yeah. So one of the, sort of an aside on that was, one of our guests, probably our most famous guests, if you will, were Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Kagan, and retired Justice Breyer, who stayed at our residence for 3 nights because they were meeting with the European Court of Justice. And it was interesting because I mentioned we have this French chef who lived about 45 minutes away. And so now I'll show you how normal my wife is. She could not bring it to herself to ask our French chef to come in early in the morning because we never had him come in for breakfast. And so she said, I'll just prepare the breakfast for the justices, which was very nice of her to do, I thought. So we're sitting in our sunroom, and Justice Kagan asked the very question you asked, how often do you get it back? And we said, oh, we were just there because the woman who was our maid of honor got married for the first time when she was 62 years old. Married a man who had never been married before, and he was in his 60s. And Justice Kagan said, oh, so there's hope for me. And I have to give it to my wife. I thought, ooh, good answer. She said, well, that's up to you to decide. Good job, Chris. Right? Fast on your feet for that one. So they were there, which was pretty interesting to have the Chief Justice and 2 other justices there. Yeah.
When you entered your ambassadorship, you had relatively limited experience. Did you find the learning curve over your first few weeks or a couple of months to be overwhelming, or did it kind of fall into place?
Well, it depends on what part of the job. Again, I've always been a newspaper reader, so I felt on a lot of the issues I was okay. The language, by far, if you're looking for my biggest insecurity, without a doubt, it would be the language. Without a doubt. I think that professional people, and this is no shocker, I think you get a political ambassador, they were very, very polite to me always, all the professional people. But I gotta believe that they would roll their eyes. I mean, just, they have, okay, who's this bozo coming in here? Who has time? Both parties. I'm not getting down on President Biden. I think that everybody, and so you get there and they treat you like English isn't your first language. I mean, the people there like do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And where I did draw the line is when you come, you do a round of interviews with the media. And they had brought in a woman to do sort of an introductory piece with me. It was going to be a one-on-one camera thing for a half-an-hour interview. And they just were all, and I said, look, when it comes to languages, stuff like that, I need help. In my old job, I dealt with the media 5 days a week. This is an area where I feel comfortable. And so I did the interview, and it was one take, and they all said, they were shocked that I didn't completely flub it, because I think they have people who maybe are great at raising money but had never talked to a reporter in their life. And that was an area where obviously I did have experience. So I would say I think I also, with the Luxembourg government, I think I had a lot more street cred because I had been a member of Congress and I had been a mayor. And so I felt that I had instantaneous rapport with the federal officials and the local officials. So that, I think, helped me a lot. And I think they respected it. Now, it could be the business community, the banking community, which is large. They might have thought, oh, there's this career politician, we don't respect him. But certainly with the Luxembourg government, I felt very, very appreciated. Yeah.
were people in Luxembourg familiar with Milwaukee, or did you talk about Milwaukee and your impressions of it?
Well, so right here, you're absolutely right. The Luxembourg American connection, the diaspora from Luxembourg to the United States in the 1800s was primarily Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, and Illinois. So there's a strong presence here. And I think that they originally thought, oh my goodness, what a brilliant choice that they picked someone from this area where this Luxembourg diaspora. That would all be rewriting history. I don't think the White House knew that at all. That the diaspora occurred here, and obviously I don't have Luxembourg tie. But when I got the call, again, during COVID, by coincidence, the next week was the opening of the museum in Belgium. And my wife and I were there the first thing that morning for the reopening, because I said, we gotta go start learning about Luxembourg. So I did a crash course in Luxembourg, and also watched this tremendous series on Netflix about a 10-part series of the World War II in color. And maybe some of you have seen that. It was a wonderful, I thought I had to just bring myself up to speed. Now, my dad served in World War II. My mother actually lost her first husband in the Battle of the Bulge. So that was a part that was a very, very emotional tie for me. Was my mother was from Sturgeon Bay, and after she graduated from high school, she moved to Green Bay, met a guy from Rhinelander who's in St. Norbert's. They got married in June of 1944 in Texas, and he was killed December 17th. So my mom was a 23-year-old widow, and then met my dad, who had been a navigator flying missions over Germany in Madison as a student. So that I actually got very choked up at the 80th memorial talking about that, because I never would have dreamt my mom again had passed away that here I'd end up literally miles from where her first husband was killed. So history has a strange way of.
Did they have any impressions about Milwaukee, Wisconsin?
I think positive, really. I mean, the Grand Duke has been here. The other members of the royal family have been here. So I would say yes. I think that, not surprisingly, New York City, Washington, Florida, and California are the places people go. I mean, I think we're still, for a lot of people, flyover country. For a lot of them. Yeah.
You alluded to the staff you had earlier in your talk, and you had staff here in Milwaukee, of course, and that's got to be helpful in what you're trying to do as an ambassador. And there's a flow of information that how does.
So the staff, we had a small staff. We were a small embassy in Paris and in Brussels, for that matter. There were probably hundreds and hundreds of people. Our professional staff was maybe 15 people, a couple economic people, a couple political people. The biggest part of the staff is security, quite honestly, that you would have. But very, very well educated people, very bright, all of them, very bright, very educated. I think, and maybe I'm wrong, you'd have to ask them, I think I proved my worth to them. And a lot of these things, when you're in tight quarters, things can get pretty prickly when you have an ambassador and his or her spouse, and the living conditions and what they expect and things like that. I was going to say before, and I didn't mention it, I had this individual from the State Department who came for lunch, and she said to me, "So did you bring your own chef with you from the United States?" And I said it to my wife, and she said, "Yes, you did." So there's a lot of people who have these positions have a little different lifestyle than I'm used to. Let me just put it that way. I said, I'm the ambassador for the middle class. Yeah, John.
I'd like to recognize what Tom did as congressman from our city in securing the lighthouse, the North Point Lighthouse. This staff literally made that happen, and you should get credit.
Thank you for your leadership, John. Thank you. All right, I think one last question, yeah.
Seems to me you were lucky not to get Canada, although
how that relationship has deteriorated.
Now I speak a little more French, and of course, that wouldn't hurt being the ambassador to Canada. And
You could become their governor.
Yeah, exactly, become their governor. So again, I'll sort of close on this, how my life is different. So I'm feeling miserably right now, because my wife loves to do projects around our house. And I don't. Last summer, it was actually last September, we had a leak in the bathroom and the pipes burst. And so she did a wonderful job. She painted the living room wall. And so she called me and she said, look at this paint job. Look what a great job I did on this paint job, how nicely it's drying. And I'm looking at it and saying, yeah, it really is drying nicely. It's really drying nicely. But at the same time, to sort of stay out of harm's way, I thought, okay, I don't like doing these projects around the house. What can I do? And I thought, our lawn looked terrible because we had been gone for 3 years. I thought, okay, I'm going to seed a big part of our lawn. So I raked it really well, and I got all this grass seed, and then I put the topsoil on, and then I put the hay on, and then twice a day I'd get out there and water it, move the sprinkler around, and admire how it's growing. And that same week, this is an absolute true story, someone said to me, so how was your week? And I said, well, this week I watched the paint dry and the grass grow. So that's my new life, watching the paint dry and the grass grow. Thank you very much. This is the beer. Bockering is the beer. The beer that I consider to be. I got to know the owner of that brewery. They've had this beer for hundreds of years.
Okay, but stop asking me questions about this. You just heard it.
Oh no, you can buy it here locally in a couple places. It's good beer. It's good beer. All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Thank you.